If you process it right, you get a fruitiness out of it, like mango, like lychee, like so many different tropical and stone fruits, that this is really beyond imagination. I would say it can easily rival a geisha or those superstars that just came out of the jungle, let's say, some years ago.
Today we're going to talk about a very special coffee species. It's a species that only few people have heard of and even fewer have tasted it. The topic is of course Liberica coffee, and with us we have Dr. Steffen Schwarz from the Coffee Consulate in Germany. Dr. Schwarz has been involved in the coffee industry for more than 20 years, and he's one of the few people who is involved in both the academic scientific side of coffee and the more practical commercial side at the same time. The way I first met Dr. Schwarz was when he arranged the world's first Liberica Coffee Roasting Championship and exhibition in 2019 in Borneo. At that event, he also arranged a cross-species cupping with both Robusta, Arabica and Liberica at the same table, which was one of the most unusual and exciting things I've ever tried at a coffee event. So Dr. Schwarz, thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a bit more about how you got interested in different coffee species and more specifically Liberica?
For me, coming from outside and not being born into the coffee industry, I was always curious to really understand it. It's like when you go into wine, you want to understand what's red wine and white wine and what are the different varieties in each. And by trying to get an oversight in coffee, I was kind of falling in some older books over different species. And there wasn't just Arabica and Canephora or Robusta, as you say, but there were even much more. There was Murta, there was Liberica, Excelsia, Congensis, Eugenoides. I found a lot, and I was wondering where they all were. Like, why would they disappear? Like, what happened? And for what reason? And you couldn't really find good reasons for it. And when, as a natural scientist, you don't find good reasons, you have to find yourself. So I was first of all looking for Liberica, trying to buy them with green coffee sellers, and I surrendered and abandoned after 5 years of asking people for Liberica, and everyone said that doesn't exist or it tastes bad. So everyone had a simple answer, and this is still what most people believe: it tastes bad, but actually it doesn't taste bad. I mean, a white wine is a bad red wine, that's true, but actually it is not a red wine. And by going and digging deeper and deeper in Liberica, I found out that most are rumors, most is just false information, widely spread by someone reading one book and writing two others out of it. So the false knowledge is easily multiplied, but no one really gave Liberica or the other species a chance. And that was the idea why we thought, why wouldn't we go to Malaysia, where is today the biggest production still of Liberica, and really wake up everyone in this coffee world to really say there is a good reason why there is Liberica, and it has a real fantastic cup quality if it is treated correctly and if it is processed and harvested correctly.
Just to go back to the cross-species cupping, where we did something unusual, which is cupping the coffee in order of sweetness. So first Robusta, then Arabica, and finally Liberica. I think a lot of people know that Arabica is sweeter than Robusta, or at least know it intuitively, but it's probably more news that Liberica is sweeter than Arabica. Have you done any scientific testing of this, or is it just based on taste?
You can measure it and you can also taste it. The taste, I think, is even so impressive when you first cup correctly processed and roasted and brewed Liberica. You're really shocked, and people believe you did actually put sugar in the cup. It is nearly irritating because it is really missing the bitterness that you always have in a cup of coffee. So it's probably even a cup of joe for non-coffee drinkers, actually, because it's so sweet and also so fruity, because it also has extremely fruity characteristics, very mangoish, like stone fruit, etc. But also when we measure it, in contradiction to what you usually find as information, it is lower in caffeine than the Canephora. It is about the same as Arabica, and it depends more on the varieties. There is different varieties of Libericas, and there's different varieties of Arabica, and there is quite a big amount of Libericas that even have a little lower coffee than the Arabicas, but it is nearly comparable. But the sugar can be about 20 times higher than in Arabica. And that is really why the Liberica is also the secret of the Kopi Luwak. If you have a wild Kopi Luwak, then the Luwak will usually choose to have some Liberica in his diet. So when you analyze the beans exactly from a wild Luwak, you always have a certain share of Liberica inside that. So basically it's a blend because it doesn't just pick single varieties. So that's also one of the main differences, because those animals actually are picking only the ideal, perfect ripe fruits. It doesn't go for underripe and it doesn't go for overripe if you let them in free nature. If you don't capture them and hold them in cages like most people are doing to create it, which is absurd and pervert. But anyway, then you will still find in a wild selection of Kopi Luwak, always like 5 to 10%, depending on where they are exactly, Liberica beans inside. That's also why a lot of people believed there is changes that happen to the bean due to the digestion within the Luwak. That's not true. It's false. There is no changes through the digestion. It is basically by the choice, by the picking of the cherry and by the type of the cherry you pick, because Liberica tastes so significantly different that is the explanation of the Kopi Luwak, one of the most expensive and most desired cups of coffee that we know in the world. And picked at the ideal moment, and by eating the cherry, the Luwak, of course, prevents the cherry from fermenting.
I've been experimenting more with Liberica the last year since the cross species coming. And while it's very sweet, it's still quite different from Arabica. It's a flavor you have to get used to a bit more. Where do you see the potential for Liberica, both commercially and from a scientific point of view?
There is, but we, like you correctly say, it has a very bewildering taste if it's not correctly processed. It will be very lactic and sometimes animal-like. You feel like standing in a cow stable maybe, and it can be very leathery and or like wet fur from a monkey, which is probably not a preferred flavor. I imagine a package that you call the aroma of wet monkey fur will probably not attract too many buyers. But if you process it extremely well done and really in a good fermentation, and again, you have to understand it has such big amounts of sugar that it starts to wildly ferment directly after picking. So it really needs to be picked and instantly be processed. And I mean, really, between picking and the processing, there shouldn't be even 30 minutes. And that is what would put most people already in a big problem, because they pick it somewhere in the morning and then over the entire day they collect it and then they bring it somewhere. And then eventually the next day something will happen with the coffee. And that is toxic for the Liberica. But if you process it right, you get a fruitiness out of it, like mango, like lychee, like so many different tropical and stone fruits, that this is really beyond imagination. So there is a huge potential to the Liberica and to the cup that it's provide, given the fact it is correctly processed.
So do you see it as a coffee you can just brew normally, as a French press, drip, AeroPress, so on? Or where do you see the potential?
I think there it's definitely it will be a specialty coffee, and it can easily overrun anything that is like now provided by single origins or single varieties that are popping up through different, let's say, coffee sales. I would say it can easily rival a geisha or those superstars that just came out of the jungle, let's say, some years ago, when just one farm planted them in Panama and everyone say, wow, that's an amazing flavor. The flavor of Liberica, and I mean, as we could see this easily also in Malaysia at this first Liberica roast competition, where we would send samples of high-end quality Liberica to roasters across the world. They were absolutely shocked with the result in the cup. Sadly, this momentarily is not available. I wouldn't know really who would provide. If you would like to buy this now in Europe, in Northern America, or across Asia, where you could buy it. It is still not really there. So we need to stimulate the farmers to really dare to do it, but also to learn how to process it correctly.
From a farmer's perspective, is there any good reasons to grow Liberica? It sounds like it's more work than comparable Arabica, for instance.
It is definitely more work than Arabica, but again, it depends on where you are. Imagine if you are located in Malaysia, you could grow it in areas that are not suitable to grow Arabica or not even suitable to grow Canefra, because you can really go down to sea level and you can grow it on clay soil. You can grow it on turf. So this is really unique. It allows you to be growing coffee in complete other areas where normally you wouldn't even have a chance to do any decent crop. And if you have the right pruning and growing techniques, like the right cultivation style, you can really have a very good yield out of it.
Right now, there's a lot of talk about climate change and how coffee might start to be seriously threatened in just 10 to 20 years. Is there any hope that Liberica could play a role in the future as a more climate-proof coffee?
I would clearly say yes. And in this scenario, we should even add that the Canefra, having the flattest root system, has the least chances of survival. Because everyone shouts, well, Arabica will be replaced by the Canefra or Robusta. The answer is clearly no, it won't, because the Canefra will already be dead before the Arabica dies, because it can't reach the water. You can see this in India now. India is growing basically 50% Arabica and 50% Canefra. They have much more problems now with the Canefra due to drought. And the Canefra, the Robustas, will definitely not be able to survive in a drier environment or having less water like they are having now. And this is where the Liberica now really pushes in. Liberica, again, with this deep root system, is much more independent from the, let's say, actually rain and precipitation situation that is coming over the year. Even if it changes a little bit more, it has possibilities to balance out much more than all other coffee plants. And again, I see a big chance also in grafting. Some method that for a long time has been abandoned, but grafting is a real good technology. And it's used in fruits, it's used in vegetables everywhere. If you buy a normal cucumber, then the cucumber is grafted. If you don't buy the seed, but if you buy a cucumber plant, then it's usually a grafted cucumber. If you buy a cherry tree, then it's a grafted cherry tree. You always have the root system part, and you have the upper part for the fruit. And that is something that I think will also be coming up as a new hidden champion in coffee production. Grafting basically means you're cutting one plant and you are inserting the other plant on top of it. So you would basically use the root system of a Liberica and add, let's say, an Arabica on top of it. That would make the Arabica resistant to a lot of diseases in the soil, like nematodes won't be able to attack it anymore. And it would be able to absorb all the minerals and all the moist from even deeper areas. It is done now, but not with Liberica. Funny enough, it is done with Canefra, which in my point of view is absolutely wrong, because if you are grafting it on a plant that has even a lower penetration into the soil, then of course it will be more susceptible to drought. They do it because the Canefra often isn't attacked by nematodes. So if you have any parasites in the soil, they don't attack the Canefra so much because it has a higher content of caffeine. So by the amount of caffeine, the Canefra protects itself. The Liberica does it by having different kind of aromas that are repellent to the parasite.
So just to understand this correctly, the root system is also what's responsible for bringing the flavors to the cherries and seeds. So does that mean that an Arabica grafted onto a Liberica is capable of producing some unusual or even better flavors we haven't tried before?
Yes, absolutely. And this will be a massive change. So because then it has the opportunity. Imagine yourself being a coffee plant, and the root system would be a straw. If you have a long straw, you can drink very deep out of the pot. If you have no straw, you can only drink on the surface. So having that allows you a complete other resistancy and also flavor formation. And we also have to understand that other than we usually think, in the normal perception, everyone thinks that a tree or a shrub has the roots, and the roots are working like a snorkel that just kind of absorb everything. That's wrong. Only 30% of the transport in the root system actually, or in those systems that are going below the soil, it's a microsinus system, because the roots themselves also have friends that are fungi, and the fungi also provide them with minerals in terms for extract of sugar. So the plant feeds the fungi by giving them glucose and fructose and receives minerals from them. So you have different friends in different layers, and you also have bacteria that are actually entering inside the root. So 70% of the transport through the root are passive transport, not active by the plant, but they are going by microorganisms that can enter through specific gates into the plant. They are invited guests to the plant.
What I'm thinking when I hear this is, why aren't coffee farmers and coffee companies doing it already? Why can't we buy any of this super coffee in the shops?
I think it is a classical lack of knowledge. That's the one thing. And then, of course, this knowledge is not a knowledge that you can easily commercialize. So big companies, what can they provide? If they tell you to use Liberica and graft on it, they can't make the same money as if they are selling you a fertilizer. So it is the business model behind it. The business model is not sexy to big companies.
The last time we talked about Liberica was around 1.5 years ago. So what has happened since then? Any interesting developments?
Well, yes, I think there is now at least some trial plantations, also some new trial plantations in Malaysia. Ourselves, we do also have, together with friends of ours in India, some plantations where we are now also more and more growing Liberica. And we are now looking massively into how to correctly process the Liberica in a way that we really stabilize those fruity, sweet flavors and aromas that usually would be just kind of fermented by uncontrolled fermentation processes, if we don't find a way to really stabilize it and find a viable and also payable and affordable way for farmers. That's where we are at now in the moment.
You mentioned that Liberica is different in different parts of the world. Has there been done any research about the different varieties? So is there any knowledge about one variety being like the geisha of Liberica, another one being like the Pacamara, and so on?
Very little. The Liberica basically dies at around 1900, all the knowledge of it. So the best knowledge we have goes from 1880 to 1900 or 1910. That's basically where it all ends. So over 110 years ago, the chapter of Liberica basically ends. And so we have to really go back there and dig deep to understand. Even today, if you're looking for material on Liberica, even the internet, no matter how big it is, nearly provides nothing about Liberica. That is already an astonishing fact, by being the third biggest species in the world. And that shows also how reduced our biodiversity in crop actually is in agriculture. One thing for sure, it's another species, but it's a very close cousin to the Liberica, is the Excelsior. And the Excelsior proves to be one of the superheroes of flavor. It is often even kind of confused with Liberica. And a lot of Excelsior is traded and sold as a Liberica, while it has a different shape. It looks more like capers and is a little smaller than the Liberica. But it is very interesting. There is, as far to my knowledge so far, around 20 to 30 varieties of Liberica that I would know of. There certainly are more, but they come in very different sizes already, from really huge, some like 4 to 5 centimeters big cherries that are nearly like small apricots, where you really say, wow, that's coffee. And also when you see the leaves are huge. I mean, I have 3 dried out leaves here laying with me. Let me just get them. And it's very interesting. So this is a dried Arabica leaf. This is a Mundo Novo, which is already not too small. And now I'm showing you a Liberica leaf. This is Liberica. As you see, it's so big it even completely hides it. So if you compare the leaves, and I have to go back so that you can see, it's incredible to see the difference between Arabica and Liberica. This is really shocking. And you can imagine it's a giant of a plant that of course needs much more nutrients to be able to grow. It needs more heat, more warmth. But then again, it is adapted to areas that today we are losing the ability of growing other coffees by climate change. So it can be a good answer on climate change. That's also something we should never forget. And again, Liberica is resistant to most nematodes, and it is also much more resistant to coffee leaf rust.
And here, finally, Dr. Schwarz, where can people buy specialty grade Liberica, and what is the time frame before we see it out in the shops?
I would think give this world another 3 years, and there will be much more coming up. I mean, in the moment, you might be able to find it in Malaysia. There is some companies that we also saw in the Borneo Coffee Symposium. You might get some through Earthlings. There is the company My Liberica. There is also the House of Candle, as it's also called. So there is some very few people offering Liberica. Also, we do offer some at Amarella Trading, but this is like what, 600 kilograms to 2 tons in a year. So that is basically nothing. If one coffee shop would say, hey, we want like 200 kilograms, that would be like 10% of a super good harvest year. So usually we would be selling this like 30 kilo in 30 kilo bags and say, be happy if you have one bag. Yeah? The other thing that is getting close to Liberica sweetness is if you take the Indian S795. The S795 is a hybrid between the old Kents, so the old Indian Arabicas that have been brought in by Baba Budan, and then later by Mr. Kent, been selected out of the old chicks, the coffees from Chikmagalur. So the old chicks are the grandfathers and grandmothers and fathers and mothers of the Kents, and then the Kents have been crossbreeded with the S288, which is the Liberica line, and that formed the S795. And you find in it these really beautiful berry notes and the sweetness. So there is still also parts from the father, from the male side Liberica inside that cup. So if you want to have a pre-Liberica experience, you might find it in an S795.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schwarz, for coming on the channel and telling us about this fascinating species. I really hope that more people get to try this unique coffee and that we'll see more of it out in the coffee shop soon.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me and talking to you and your audience here today.
Thank you.